This is a Sikha on Likutei Sichos, book 24. Sikha about Yom Kippur. The end of the tractate of Yuma in the Talmud Yerushalmi, there is an argument brought about the confession, the vidui. On Yom Kippur, what's the argument? It says a person has to enunciate, has to specify which sin he did. In other words, don't just say, "Oi, I've sinned." Say which sin you did. That's what Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says. Or the Gemara Bavli, this is attributed to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bola. Akiva says you don't have to specify the deed that you did. It's enough just to say, "Hashem, I've sinned." Then the Yerushalmi continues and says, and with this he finishes the Sechta tractate. Says pasuk in Yirmiyah, Mikveh Yisrael Hashem. Hashem is literally the pool of immersion for the Jewish people. Just like a mikveh, a pool of water, purifies the impure that immerse in it. Similarly, Hashem purifies the Jewish people. And so it says, continues the Gemara, I will sprinkle upon you pure waters. And you will be purified, mikol to meisechem, from all your impurities, mikol yilechem, from all your dirt, atay eschem, I will purify. So we have to understand, what's the connection between the argument that says, do you or don't you have to specify your sin, to the verse, to the drasha that follows about Hashem being like the mikveh of the Jewish people, just like the mikveh purifies, similarly Hashem purifies. What's the connection between the two? Now you could learn very simply that there's really no connection. The fact is, because the Gemara doesn't want to finish by talking about something negative, like whether or not you have to specify sin. We have the concept of Messiahim b'toiv. We try and finish off with something good, leave a lingering good taste in the mouth. So instead of finishing off whether or not to talk about sin, on top of that finale, they ended a grand finale. Hashem is like the mikveh, is like the mikveh of the Jewish people, and Hashem, this way it ends with the word atahir eschem, I will make you purified. However, everything in Torah is exact, so it makes much more sense to say, it's much smoother to say, the fact that the Gemara finishes with this particular good thing, it could have said anything good. The fact that it chooses this good, this topic of good to end with, it must be because this topic about Hashem being the mikveh and sprinkling the Jewish people with purity must have a connection with the argument between Rabbi Akiva and his counterpart about whether or not you have to specify the sin. In the ending of the Masechta itself, you have to understand, because we are taught by our sages that the Hashem is like the mikveh of the Jews. That's already brought in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Akiva said, Ashreichem Yisrael, fortunate are you, Jewish people. For who do you purify yourself? Who purifies you? Your Father in heaven, as it says, and I will sprinkle upon you pure waters. And it says, Mikveh Yisrael Hashem, Hashem is the mikveh of Yisrael. Just like the mikveh, the ritual waters, purify the impure. Similarly, Hashem purifies Yisrael. But there's differences between the way the Mishnah says it and the way the Gemara says it. You would have noticed that, first of all, the Gemara brings these two verses in an opposite order. First brings, right, in paragraph number 2 of what we learned, it says that the mikveh of Yisrael, Hashem is the mikveh of Yisrael. And then it says the verse that I will sprinkle upon you holy waters. In the Mishnah it says the reverse. First it says v'zarakti, I will sprinkle upon you. And then it says Hashem is the mikveh of Yisrael. That's one change between the Mishnah and the Gemara. Change number 2 in the Mishnah is only brought the beginning of the verse. I will sprinkle upon you pure waters. The end of the verse is alluded to by V'goymer, by the word etc. However, in the Gemara, the whole pasuk is what? V'zarakti aleichem mayim ta'irim utahartem. I will sprinkle upon you holy waters, and you will be purified from all your impurities and so on. The whole pasuk is said not just with a V'goymer, with an etc. Now, the fact that the Gemara changes from the language of the Mishnah tells us that the way the Gemara brings what seems to be the identical quote of what the Mishnah is saying, but because there's these differences, it means that really the Gemara is saying something different, which we need to understand what is the difference between the way the Gemara is teaching and the way the Mishnah is teaching. And we could say that the difference will be hinged on the fact that the Gemara is saying it in following the argument about whether or not you have to specify the sin. Somehow, that argument, if we get to the rationale behind why there's that argument, we will now have a deeper insight into this concept. Once we have a deeper insight, the verse of Mikveh Yisrael Hashem will, this verse, we'll understand why the Gemara reverses the order of the verses, right? And says it different than the Mishnah. So first, let's understand, it seems what we all can't get away from trying to understand what is at the crux of this argument. Whether or not you have to specify or not specify the sin. Fantastic. Base, paragraph 2. So first, let's explain what is the argument, whether or not you have to specify the sin. Gemara brings verses. One opinion says you have to specify the sin. You know where you know that from? Moshe Rabbeinu pleads before Hashem and he says, please Hashem, beseech you, the people have sinned a big sin. You know what they did? And he specifies the sin. They made a golden deity. So you see, you have to specify the sin. Rabbi Akiva says, no. David HaMelech says, Ashrei nesui pesha kesui chata. Happy is the person who covers over his sin. Because you have to cover over the sin. You don't speak about the sin. But first of all, usually we would assume that this still doesn't mean that we're saying that the pasuk told us something without any rationale. And especially that in many places, the argument, even though hinged as it may be on the particular verse that supports it, but the argument really is also a rational argument, which is then supported by the verse that indicates in that way. There's also, it's not just a exeris hakos of a decree of the Torah. There's an argument in the way they're looking at it. So Tosfos explains that the rationale behind their argument is that Rabbi Yehuda says you have to specify the sin in order that you should have shame. You should be embarrassed. A person should be embarrassed from his sin. A person just says, I've sinned. I wouldn't say it sounds cool, but it doesn't sound so bad. No, we just say, I've sinned. I didn't want to say what, but once you have to specify the sin, that doesn't sound so cool. It's not so, that's not cool. So why does Rabbi Akiva hold you shouldn't say? One who holds you shouldn't say your sin is in order that they should not suspect him of other sins. What does that mean? Let's see. So we can say that the reasoning behind this argument, let's understand what's behind that itself. Say that the rationale is whether, I mean, there's two good points here. First of all, it is more effective to say which sin you did. It's more embarrassness. On the other hand, it can be embarrassing because if you say what sin you did, you may be seen now as a sinner, and now it may be that you may be considered unreliable. Oh yeah, sinner. Well, can't rely on this guy. So that admitting a sin or specifying it. So let's see. A good question. I'm trying to understand it myself. The concept of being embarrassed of your sin, that's relevant right now. The teshuva will be better now, be more effective, more authentic, more more heartfelt if you say which sin, because you're going to be more embarrassed. You're going to have more sincere regrets. However, when you're talking about the long term, there could be a great loss by the fact that this person is now considered a person that one cannot rely on. He loses his reliability. In other words, so you're asking, but if he just admits to sinning in general, doesn't that also happen? I'm not sure. I think once a person clearly it's more embarrassing to admit to a particular sin, and it also creates when a person just says I sinned, you think, well, maybe he just missed 5 minutes of Torah study that day. But if you start to say I sinned, I ripped off somebody or something, that's it. Next time oh, that guy's walking into the room. Oh, that guy's walking into the room. So the question is, but that's a long-term thing. Right now, it's better for the teshuva to say what you did. So the question is, and maybe this will come back to haunt him. We know that there's a prohibition to tell about teshuva. Remember what you used to do, wild woolly days. No, I found that it's zechor ma'asecha rishonim. Remember your earlier misdeeds. You should do it. So, in other words, it could be something that haunts him later on. So, Mela, it comes out. The question is, there's a well-known argument that we find in many places in Shas. What do you look at more? The reality the way it is now, or are you more concerned with the overall long-term situation? Because here will be, if you say, Rabbi Yehuda says you got to specify the sin, he's obviously going to be more concerned with the quality of the act of teshuvah right now. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says, no, I want to look at what's the better route for the person in general to get closer to Hashem, even in the future, taking the future into account. And I don't want him to have to specify his sin because this may overall pull him down into a place of being suspect and being excluded from various things and not being able to properly participate in the community and serving Hashem. But there's a downside if we don't tell him to specify this. And the downside is his current confession is not going to be as intense. So what do you look at, long-term or short-term? This is a two ways of looking at it, and depends. They're both right. Depends which right. But it'll also have a loss in the future. Yeah. But that will have an effect on who you are. Yeah. But we could delve more into it. I'm not crystal clear on it, but you hear the rationale here, at least paragraph 3. But according to this explanation, in the way we understand Rabbi Akiva, now they'll come at a difference. Let's understand one second. We're saying, why does Rabbi Akiva say don't specify? Because we don't want you to come into so people to be suspicious to suspect you of doing other sins as well. So then what about saying it softly? What about getting both? Saying it specifically so you can be embarrassed when you say what you did, not saying it out loud so that nobody else hears, and therefore you're not suspected in the future of doing other things like this. But Rabbi Akiva doesn't say, don't say it out loud. He just says, don't specify at all, which would seem to lead us to understand that Rabbi Akiva is, there's something else here. What else? What else is that there's a few levels of teshuvah. A few levels of teshuvah that in general, we divide them into two categories of return to Hashem. Teshuvah miyira, serving Hashem from fear, and teshuvah, returning Hashem from love. We could say that whether or not to specify the sin, it depends what kind of teshuvah we're talking. When we're talking about teshuvah from fear, so we make sense to say that he has to specify his sin. So since his teshuvah is from fear, what does it mean, teshuvah from fear? Teshuvah from fear means he's protecting, he's concerned about the impact that the sin will have on him. Whether this could be either the punishment or the reward. He is at the center of this teshuvah. Teshuvah me'ir means I have fear that this will affect me negatively. If it's about me, so it could be also I look forward to the reward it will give me. That's also a form of self-motivation in doing this teshuvah. Now, when it comes to I'm worried and concerned about what this mitzvah or sin is going to do if I do it or don't do it, there is a difference what kind of a sin. Every sin has its own energy, it's its own level of severity. So when I mention which sin, it's a big difference. A big sin, I'm going to tremble more. I'm going to understand that the drawback in that big sin is even greater. However, we can know the chart based on the punishments. For example, we know that eating bread on Pesach comes together with a violation, prohibition of kares, excision. Understand that that's not the same as the prohibition or the omission. What happens if somebody didn't say Shema in the proper? You understand? You know, there's different mitzvahs and sins, and while it says don't try and judge them because you never really know, but still, we can see from their rewards and punishments. So therefore, we need to specify which sin, because if you don't specify which sin, the person is going to have a different feeling. If he just says I violated, maybe he violated, he spoke some lashon hara. I mean, lashon hara is not good. Yeah, but most people are not going to have that same feeling as if they say they killed somebody. However, when we talk about teshuvah from love, what does that mean? Teshuvah from love, in its definition, means he's not doing it for himself. He's doing it because Hashem wants it. So what does that mean? That doesn't, the difference, every mitzvah is the same. Every mitzvah is a connection to Hashem. Every sin is a disconnection to Hashem. What's the difference? Which one? There's no difference between the kala shabakala is the simplest of things and the most strict of things. If you separate yourself from the will of Hashem, you're separate. So you don't. Why should you have to specify your sin? We try to remember. I heard somebody explain it well. The mitzvahs are the will of Hashem. Somebody was giving a shir Tanya. Let me see. The mitzvahs are the will of Hashem. Let's say, so a person says, well, look, I did 70% of the will, right? Let's say you want to go from here to the main road in Sukhumvit. Okay. The king said he wants you to show up at the corner of Sukhumvit and Soy 22. You tried, but you didn't get that far. You got to the corner of Sainam Tip 2 and Soy 22. You didn't get as far as Sukhumvit. So you say, so the king says, you didn't show up. He says, yeah, but I showed up 30%. Doesn't make a difference. You show up 30% or 99%. Doesn't make a difference. You weren't there at the corner that the king passed by and told you to be there. What's the difference? If I look at the effort, yeah, okay. But bottom line, when you talk about fulfilling the wish of somebody, and it doesn't matter what the wish was. when you just look at the ratzon, when you look at the aspect of the wish, doesn't make a difference if he asks you for something which is really not important or something important. Was the wish fulfilled or not? That's all. So Rabbi Akiva says we're talking about teshuvah from love. Teshuvah from love is how's my connection with Hashem? And when I admit, when I confess, when I bemoan and bewail the fact that I didn't do the mitzvah, doesn't matter which mitzvah. I had an opportunity to connect and I didn't connect. The Avera separated me from Hashem. What's the difference? Which Avera? If it was the one that took me 50 meters away or 500 meters away, it took me away from Hashem. The detachment is the same point of detachment. When you're talking about teshuvah miyira, you're talking about how much reward or punishment I get. Yeah, so there is. If I'm a little closer, maybe I can get rewarded for the effort, whatever it is. But if I'm looking at was Hashem's wish fulfilled or not, I'm not looking at myself, whether I'll be rewarded for effort or not. I'm only waiting for one thing: my connection to Hashem by flicking the switch. If I didn't flick the switch, it didn't happen. Doesn't matter what. Doesn't matter if it doesn't matter if it's a switch of 100-watt bulb, switch of 1,000-watt bulb. The circuit wasn't completed. Chapter 4, paragraph 4. According to this, we can understand the argument of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva. But first, let's give a preface. We've spoken at length, says the Rebbe, elsewhere. This is in relationship to Tanya, that whenever you say the word teshuvah, and it doesn't matter which teshuvah you talk about, highest, lowest, there's an aspect in which all teshuvahs are equal. There's a commonality in all teshuvahs. If they have the name teshuvah, whatever the other descriptive terminology to the word teshuvah, but the word teshuvah means to return. At its core, every teshuvah has to be, the Rebbe says in a footnote, like when we talk about geula, about redemption, all redemptions have to have some association with each other. They're a release from a prior constrained state to a current redemptive state. Teshuvah is somehow a person was distant and now he comes near. Teshuvah, lashuv, to return. So therefore, even the lowest level of teshuvah is still the person coming to Hashem, turning to Hashem. So in teshuvah from love, it's about the person coming to totally connect to Hashem, to cleave to Hashem. If it's teshuvah just because of the person's self-interest, in other words, he doesn't want to be punished, or he wants to have the reward from Hashem. So why does a person not get to the full level of only being interested in Hashem, not caring, not being motivated by what it does for me, but only being motivated as this is Hashem's will and all I want is connect to Hashem, because he has a yetzer, he has an evil inclination. But therefore, it covers over his true desire, and he has to motivate himself to navigate and overcome the negative part of him, the yetzer hara, by speaking the language about what's good for me, bad for me. That's really what teshuvah from yira is. You explain to even your animal self that yes, a mitzvah, the avera, eating the cheesecake after you ate meat is delicious in terms of the tongue, in terms of your animalistic impulse. But there's more to life than the short-term animalistic desire. And if you think about what's in it for you, the long-term good for you, whether it's in Gan Eden or whether it's in Hashem's reward here in this world, the long-term, you got to be smart. I mean, yeah, of course, you drink a lot of sugar, it tastes good, but you may have a problem. We all understand long-term versus short-term, but giving up the short-term in favor of the long-term is a language that the yetzer hara can be spoken to. It's good for talking about what's good for the person, self-centered. But so why doesn't a person reach the ultimate of teshuvah? Because he has that covering of the self-centeredness of the yetzer hara. But it's about teshuvah is at every level about moving towards Hashem. So therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, who says that the future, take a look at the big picture, even if that's not the way it is right now. So Rabbi Akiva says, granted, this person who's coming to do tshuva, we don't ask him what kind. Rabbi Akiva, the argument was not, let's take a test. If you're doing teshuva from love of Hashem, don't say which sin. Just speak about, I sinned. I got disconnected from Hashem. Enough. We don't ask the guy. What happens if the guy's doing teshuva on the low level? And he is still concerned. I sinned, and it was a real big one. Small one, not a big deal. So then we do want him to say which sin. Why are we telling him don't specify? So Rabbi Akiva says, because I look at the big picture. If he's coming to Hashem right now, he's not at that deeper level. But you know what? The deep down, that tnuah, that movement, what's coming to Hashem, you know what it contains deep down? It's really got in its potential the true coming to Hashem, peel away the Yetzer Hara, the self-centeredness of the animalistic urge that he has, peel that away. Really doesn't care about himself. He just cares about Hashem, and that's all he wants. So let's already look at him as being a potential for that level, and let's take that into account and don't specify this. So Rabbi Akiva says, don't specify this. If Yehuda says, no, it's not here. Right now, he's at a level where the severity, the theatrics, not the theatrics, the details and the level of punishment and the level of reward does make a difference for him. So say which sin, so you get the full texture, the full experience of feeling what you did. You're not there yet to be, all you care about is Hashem, and therefore it doesn't matter what it was. It's disconnection from Hashem, that's the problem. Rabbi Akiva says, no, let's look at what it is in a bigger context. If you're coming to Hashem, you're on a path which leads to thinking just about Hashem. So let's treat you that way already. How do we look at it? Paragraph 5. According to this explanation, Rabbi Akiva, the fact that he holds, in other words, once we deep dived into the rationale of this argument, Rabbi Akiva says you don't have to specify the deeds because we look at the overall, and in the overall future, this is a person who's motivated deep down by connection to Hashem. We can explain something else. The Rambam says, the Rambam decides in this argument that you have to specify the sin. By the way, that's what we do. So al-chet, we specify this. That's not like Rabbi Akiva, but the commentaries ask, we know there's a rule that in the Gemara, when there's an opinion of Rabbi Akiva, and he has his colleagues argue on him, halacha ke Rabbi Akiva mechaberei, the law is like Rabbi Akiva. So why does Rambam not paskin like Rabbi Akiva that you don't have to specify which sin? So the Kesef Mishnah, Rabbi Yosef Karo, who later went on to write the Shulchan Aruch. First, he wrote a commentary on the Rambam, which is called the Kesef Mishnah. He answers there on the Rambam that the Gemara, the Babylonian Talmud, brings in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rav. On this verse of Tehillim that says, happy is a person who has his sin covered over. He says, how do you reconcile that pasuk about covering over sin with a pasuk that says, in the pasuk in Proverbs, in Mishlei, that says, somebody who covers over his iniquity, his sin, will not be successful. One pasuk, David HaMelech seems to say, cover over your sin. His son David, Shlomo HaMelech, in Proverbs, in Mishlei says, try and cover over your sins, you won't be successful. That seems to be contradictory. The Gemara answers, depends if it's a well-known sin or an unpublicized sin. In other words, if it's a publicized sin, you won't be successful in trying to cover it over. Admit to it, say confession. The first time, a well-known sin, everybody knows. Yeah, if it's a sin that's not known, don't talk about it. No need to go and announce it. So now, 1 second. This whole back and forth in the Gemara of Bavli cannot be according to Rabbi Akiva, because what does Rabbi Akiva say? Even if it's a well-known sin, he still says don't talk about it, don't specify. So the fact that the Bavli Gemara, the Babylonian Talmud, has a discussion to analyze these two psukim, which are both That's an analysis which only follows the opinion of the one who says you have to specify the sin. So there's an interesting rule in how do you derive what's the halacha. One of the rules is if the Gemara spends time on questioning this opinion and answering, it must be because that's the way the Babylonian Talmud sees the halacha. In other words, if that's anyway not the halacha, okay, if there's a question, it wouldn't bother so much. We leave it. We're not going to spend time to to have a question and answer the question. If anyway, that's not the way we see the final decision. So the fact that the Bavli goes back and forth in the fact that there's two ways of learning this verse. Should you say your sin? Shouldn't you say it's sin? And we said no. If it's a chetma for some, then don't try and cover it up. If it's a well-known sin, don't try and cover it up. Anyway, if it's a known sin, specify. This is not Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva would say even Rabbi Akiva is of general, just says say your sin, never specify. So obviously the Bavli doesn't go like Rabbi Akiva. So therefore the Rambam follows the Bavli. So it comes out, one second. The Yerushalmi doesn't bring this discussion about the two competing verses. Happy is the one who covers, or the one that covers won't succeed. So that means that Yerushalmi only has Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda. According to the Yerushalmi, you should follow Rabbi Akiva. But one second, if the Bavli seems to follow not Rabbi Akiva, and the Yerushalmi follows Rabbi Akiva, we have a rule. If there's an argument between the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, we follow the Bavli. We always follow the Bavli, which means to say, one second, why are we following the Bavli? It's an interesting thing. The Bavli, why do they not follow Rabbi Akiva? You know why? Because the Bavli also has a mode of thinking. Let's go back. What was the argument to Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yehuda? Do we look at the overall, or we look just at now? If it's going to be more effective teshuva now, is that what we should do? Specify? Or if overall it's better for the person not to specify, we shouldn't specify. We said that Rabbi Akiva says the overall. When we look at Bavli and Yerushalmi in general, their styles, we have another pattern that we already know from elsewhere. The Bavli will look at what's going on now. It's more down to earth, not so much. What's the situation now? What's better for now? Yerushalmi is a little bit more long term. So the Bavli follows not Rabbi Akiva. In other words, Yerushalmi follows Rabbi Akiva. Yerushalmi is more long term. How do we see this in the difference between Bavli and Yerushalmi? So there's a square brackets here. The way of learning of Bavli is called b'machashakim hoshivani. The Gemara speaks about Bavli as being a way of learning by groping in the darkness. How does the Talmud, what's the Talmudic way of learning? It's like you're groping in the darkness, trying to feel your way around, asking a question and contradiction from here and from there. It's trial and error, questions. When you're in a question, you're like in the darkness. The question covers over the truth. We have to try and uncover it. The Yerushalmi is a very different way of teaching. Yerushalmi is much more factual, statements of truth that follow each other. In order to get to the truth, you have to uncover all kinds of different layers. He says this, but it says this. It's a contradiction, and this one asks that. It's a much more. It's a much different style of learning. And that's why the Bavli, since it's called a way of learning where you have to grope in the darkness, we're going to be more thinking about the right now, because this future is still covered over. It's still not visible to us. You still have to uncover it. You have to decipher it. You have to dig. You have to kind of still get through all this multi-layered of digging and investigating to get to the truth. Yerushalmi, where everything is wide open and light, you see right away in the present, also the future. So the Yerushalmi is generally following the pattern that the overall picture is going to be more important and affect even now. If something's better for the overall picture, stick to that. Which will mean to say that if the Bavli is going more with the current, it fits more that you should specify the sin. That's why the Bavli is going like Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Specify the sin. It's better for the experience right now. Yerushalmi will remain with the opinion that Rabbi Akiva's opinion is fine for me because His opinion makes more sense for the overall experience in the person in the long run. That's more Yerushalmi like. So what we see here is that there's two in our quest for teshuva. There's two ways of doing it, and this Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda will be able to trace it in other places. The Rabbi in this sikha doesn't go, but it'll be interesting to trace Rabbi Akiva in other places, finding how he says, look at the bigger picture. Yeah, Yerushalmi is also they're Israeli Amoraim. Good question. I'm not sure. Okay. According to paragraph 6, according to the they do the Yerushalmi does respect it. The Bavli do. Okay, I'm not sure. According to this, we'll also understand the end of Masechta Yuma in the Yerushalmi, which says that the mikveh is, there's a verse that says the mikveh, the immersion pool of Yisrael is Hashem. And so it says, Hashem says, I will sprinkle upon you the waters and cleanse you. How does this connect to the argument that it follows on from about whether or not to specify the sin? So let's look at these two verses. The verse, mikveh Yisrael Hashem, that Hashem is the mikveh of the Jews. And the verse that Hashem says, I will sprinkle upon you the waters of purity. We can explain based on, here the Rebbe is merging a Tosfos Yom Tov, Rabbi Yom Tov Lippman Heller, a very important translation on the Pirush, on the Mishnah, 500 some plus years ago, the Marsha, also around that era. And they explained things in a way of drush, a way of homiletics and deeper meaning. The Rebbe took their concept and applied it here. When it says, I will sprinkle upon you, where is that from? That's talking about the inspiration that comes to a Jew from above, that Hashem awakens their hearts to Teshuvah. And when you say that Hashem is the immersion pool of the Jews, that's already something that somebody has to come and immerse himself. The person has to go and immerse himself in the mikveh. In other words, there's the process which Hashem awakens the Jew. That's expressed by V'zarakti. Hashem says, I will sprinkle upon you the walkers. That's motivated and initiated by Hashem. And then there's Hashem. Hashem is the immersion pool for the Jews, but to be immersed in the pool, you have to go and immerse yourself. So according to this, we'll understand like this. The order in the Mishnah is, first the Pasuk, Hashem says, I will sprinkle upon you, and then Hashem is an immersion pool, because that's the way of Teshuvah. Before a person does Teshuvah, before he comes close to Hashem, he's far from Hashem. And he has sins that separate between him and Hashem. So what happens? How all of a sudden does he get motivated to come to Hashem? We'll talk about it in a second. How does a person get motivated to come to Hashem? He sins, means he doesn't care about Hashem. All of a sudden, what happens all of a sudden? That he comes back to Hashem. So the Seder is that first Hashem motivates, sparks something. The Hashem throws in thoughts of tshuva into the person. The footnote, the Rebbe quotes what the Baal Shem Tov taught. Shem Tov says in Pirkei Avot, it says, B'chol yom vayom bat kol yotzet u'machrezet, bat kol yotzet mehar chorev. There's a heavenly voice from the mountain of Sinai that says, Oy lahem labriot me'elbona shel Torah. Woe to the creatures who insult the Torah. Because you imagine the Torah's waiting to learn Torah, and all of a sudden you go and watch Hollywood. I don't understand. Hollywood, you know what the Torah feels like? You picked up the New York Times. You could have picked up God's Times, the Torah, and you picked up the New York Times to read the Sunday edition. I mean, so there's a heavenly voice that goes out. The Torah is very insulting. Woe to people that insult the Torah like that. So the Baal Shem Tov asks, you ever heard it? You ever heard that heavenly voice? No, obviously not. So what's the purpose of it? Oh, the neshama here. Okay, fine. So what does he tell us about it in Pirkei Avot? Shama hears it. Sometimes on a clear day, or whenever Hashem decides so, that sparks feelings in the person that he now kind of senses, oh, hey, what am I doing? I gotta come to Hashem. That's Vizalakti. Hashem sparks the connection. But what's the purpose? The purpose is not it should stay sparked by Hashem. It's almost like when you have the ignition on a car. You know, you hear it starter, there's a starter, catalyzer, I think it's called. Is that what it's called? Starter. Starter, and you hear it. If it doesn't catch, it's not going to last long. The starter is going to drain the battery. And the purpose of being started by Hashem is the person should now toil and bring himself to a state of complete and thorough purity. And that's why the pasuk continues. And after it says, Hashem says, I will sprinkle upon you. Then it says, Hashem says that Hashem is the mikvah of the Jew, because the Jew has to go and immerse himself. He has to have total immersion in order to take this and make this his own. According to this, we'll understand why the Mishnah quotes in the first verse only the words "V'zarakti aleichem," I will sprinkle upon you, the holy waters, and it doesn't say the end of the verse, and you will become pure. Because in the Mishnah, this part of the Mishnah is just emphasizing the spark that Hashem sparks, that Hashem will sprinkle upon you. Hashem's going to kickstart you. The word utahartem, you will become purified, is already the next stage. So in this verse V'zarakti, that stage is not is hinted at only by Begoimer, where it says, etc. The real fleshing out of this concept that it's up to the Jew to fully immerse himself and make this feeling of teshuvah his own is really taught us by the next verse. The next verse being V'zarakti aleichem mikveh Yisrael Hashem, that Hashem is the mikveh of the Jews. Paragraph 7. But from this we understand that the Gemara turns around the order. Seems to be a problem with my microphone. You guys aren't hearing me well, probably. Maybe you are? Okay. Paragraph 7. From this we understand that the fact that the Gemara turns around the order of the verses is not just well, say it this way, say it that way. If we're talking here about the verse V'zarakti, Hashem will sprinkle as being Hashem's instigation, initiation of the process. So if we reverse that, what does that mean? We took away Hashem's initiation. So look how the Rebbe says it. The Mishnah is talking about Hashem's initiating of the process. Hashem says, I will sprinkle upon you a spirit of purity. Before you yourself are into the process, I'll motivate you to jump into the process. The Gemara is talking next stage. Once you're in the process and you're going into the mikveh, you're immersing yourself. Now there's another stage where Hashem again sprinkles upon you. Because it's a three-stage process. When you are kick-started by Hashem, something motivates a person to do tshuva. You know, sometimes people say, oh, that guy made me about teshuva. Oh, he told me something. Nobody can make anybody about teshuva. Because you could have met somebody 25 times and said the same thing 25 times, and all of a sudden, time number 23, the guy says, wow, I need God. What happened? We can make. It comes, you can open somebody's eyes, you can share information, but teshuva means that the person is somehow motivated to say, you know what, till now, whatever I did, it wasn't good. I got to get real. Got to come to Hashem. That comes from inside. Where's it coming from? He didn't care till now about Hashem. Why does he care? Somehow Hashem allowed him to pick up some stimuli, something that got him going. Oh, now what he does with it, plenty of people have good motivations. They get woken up and they just go turn off. You know what happens? You hit the snooze button. Then sometimes by accident, you don't even hit the snooze button, you hit the off button. That's it. You missed it. And maybe 10 years from now, you'll get another thing. And will you take it or not? It's going to be up to you. But after you jumped in and now you're motivated and you're doing the teshuvah as in a mikveh process. Because the Gemara starts by talking about the mikveh. Okay, we're talking already to the guy who's been sparked, and now he's fully immersed. Now there's something else that happens, and you know what that is? There's a Hashem gives you a higher level. Now Hashem jumps in and gives you another zzz, another sprinkle. What could that sprinkle be? Says the Rebbe, it could be that now the sprinkle, which is through hazah, there's a kind of in the red heifer, the para aduma, there was hazah, there was a sprinkling which had to be from living waters, from waters that bubbled up from the ground. That's a higher. You know what the waters, the bubbling waters, when they were mixed with the ashes of the para aduma, you know what they were able to do? That the power to purify from impurity connected with death. Oh, that's high level. So in other words, Hashem sparks you just a regular jolt. You took it, you immersed yourself, and Hashem gives you another, but a much higher level, next level. And that's what the Gemara is hinting at. After a Jew does his avodah of immersion, now Hashem gives him a higher shleimus, a higher level of completion, of a higher level in teshuvah, which is like the sprinkling, but the sprinkling of the highest form of purifying waters, the waters that take a person of the para aduma from the living spring, that take a person even out of being impure to a dead body. This is the connection between these verses. Remember we said, why does the Masechta finish with this concept of the mikveh and the bizarakti, the immersion and Hashem sprinkling holy waters? What's the connection with what was right before that, the argument? Do you specify the sin or not? Now we'll understand the connection. Because first the Gemara brings the argument between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva, whether or not you have to specify your deeds. Rabbi Akiva says, no, every teshuvah has something so powerful. Even if right now he's at the low level of teshuvah, he cares about himself, not to be rewarded, not to be punished. But looking inside, the overall picture is he wants to come to Hashem. Don't let him get bogged down in the details of the sin. He's on the run, he's on the move, he's on the roll. In order to bring out that concept, the Gemara says, look, there's different levels in this. There's the level of mikveh Yisrael Hashem, where the Jew immerses himself. And so it says that Hashem says, I will sprinkle upon him holy waters and he will become purified from all the impurities, from all the dirt, I will purify him. So we see that there's a process. If he just starts doing teshuvah, he's on the roll, and in the end it leads him to the highest level, which was what Rabbi Akiva is saying. So there's a follow-on here that has a relationship. Because really, as the Rebbe concludes, in Pnimius, deep down, all kinds of teshuvah have there's one destination. Teshuvah destination is Hashem, coming back to Hashem. It doesn't matter which path. Maybe, I'm going to say here, I'm just a maybe, because when you do Waze or maps, Google Maps, the destination is whatever it is. It'll give you how long it takes by plane, how long it takes by train, how long it takes by car, how long it takes by walk. But in the end of the day, the destination is the same. You're getting there. Teshuvah means return to Hashem. You could be in a turbo teshuvah where it's from I love, you just care about Hashem. You could still be in the bicycle one where you're pedaling hard. It's teshuvah me'ira. You're thinking is what's good for me is a bad thing. But in the end of the day, the destination, the teshuvah, the name teshuvah is one, and so it's all part of one movement of return to Hashem. What a wonderful way to begin our preparation for Yom Kippur, which will start tomorrow, right?